Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is heading to Berlin for talks with Chancellor Friedrich Merz. It comes days after the new German leader said he'd lifted any range limits on the use of German-supplied weapons. That allows Ukraine to use them to strike further into Russia. The two men already met in December when Merz was campaigning to become Chancellor. Then he said he favoured supplying Ukraine with Taurus missiles. Kyiv has requested the long-range weapons to boost its defences against Russian attacks. It's expected that Zelenskyy will press the issue again as they discuss military support and efforts to achieve a ceasefire. Well, for more on Zelenskyy's visit, let's bring in DW reporter Max Sander in Kyiv and our political correspondent Bernd Riegert here in Berlin. Max, let's start with you. What are the expectations in Kyiv from this visit?
Right, so the German Chancellor Merz and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy met just a couple of weeks ago, just recently here in Kyiv, as Merz was visiting as a member of the Coalition of the Willing. Back then, they voiced support for Ukraine, and they promised, should Russia not show itself willing to seriously negotiate an end to this war, they would ramp up pressure and increase pressure on Russia. Now, what we saw over the last couple of days and weeks is that Russia has indeed been escalating the situation. So the Ukrainians in Berlin, the Ukrainian delegation with President Zelenskyy, will likely be asking for an exchange with the chancellor what the next steps could be. There will be an update on the sanctions policies, but also in addition to that, the Germans and the Ukrainians will likely have a technical discussion about the technicalities of the next round of bilateral talks between Russia and Ukraine, and as always, also weapons aid, weapons deliveries, and investments into the Ukrainian weapons production. This time is going to be on the table.
Bernd, how is Merz called to lift long-range restrictions for German weapons in Ukraine, going down here in Germany, especially in his own coalition?
Some members of the Social Democratic Party, the coalition partner of the Conservatives, are voicing a concern and are rejecting that proposal. But the head of the Social Democrats and Vice Chancellor Lars Klingbeil said he's on the same page as Chancellor Friedrich Merz. And Friedrich Merz actually only described what is a long-standing policy of almost all NATO partners for a long time now. There are no restrictions on weapons usage, on weapons that are already delivered to Ukraine. He reiterated that, and he did not actually lift restrictions which are not there. And now the discussion is what happens if long-range weapons will be delivered in the future to Ukraine. But all these discussions here in Germany do not change anything on the ground, actually, in Ukraine, where the demand for munition and air defense is much higher than that for long-range weapons that could actually penetrate Russian airspace and Russian territory for 500 kilometers.
Bernd, before becoming Chancellor, Merz called for Germany to supply Taurus cruise missiles to Kyiv. Is this likely to be on the agenda today?
It might be on the agenda, but officially now the new stance of the German government is we don't talk about weapons deliveries anymore, to keep strategic ambiguity, to keep in order so that the Russians do not know what is actually going on, so the Russian attacker cannot prepare countermeasures in advance. But I'm quite sure they will talk about it. But also government sources say today will not, there will be not a deal done on the Taurus missiles.
Max, you think increased German support could influence Ukraine's military planning or diplomatic strategy?
I mean, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz played his role in bringing allies closer together, especially in light of the deteriorating relationship between Washington and Kyiv. And the Russians certainly see that, the Ukrainians see that, but only so much can be done with diplomacy if you're dealing with an adversary who is determined to fight this out and not bring this to a negotiated end of hostilities. What the Ukrainians are going to be hoping for as an outcome of these talks is that the Germans are going to help them invest in the Ukrainian arms production. The Ukrainians themselves have been ramping up their production of military weapons and military vehicles over the last couple of years, but they're still lacking sufficient funding, funding from foreign investors. So this is something that could help the Ukrainians, that could help the Ukrainian military and make them less dependent on foreign aid.
DW political correspondent Bernd Riegert in Berlin and our reporter Max Sander in Kyiv. Thank you both very much.